Ethan knew something was off the moment she walked in. Claire had one of those smiles, the kind that looked polished, practiced, almost too perfect. She kissed David on the cheek, laughed at all the right times, and knelt down to say hello to Ethan like she'd read it from a parenting blog. But the second David turned to hang up her coat, that smile vanished. She didn't frown, she didn't scowl, she just looked at Ethan like he was a fly she'd swat if it weren't for the mess. Ethan was 8. He wasn't supposed to notice these things, but he did. Not with words, not with explanations, just with a tight feeling in his chest that didn't go away, and a voice inside him that whispered, "Something isn't right." That night, when David tucked him in, Ethan asked, "Do you really like her?" David chuckled, ruffling his hair. "Of course I do. She's been through a lot. Give her a chance, buddy." Ethan nodded, but in his gut he wasn't sure. The next few weeks were full of little things. Claire never hurt him, not physically, but her voice got sharper when David wasn't around. She corrected everything he said. She rolled her eyes when he talked about school. Once, when he spilled orange juice on the floor, she didn't yell. She just leaned in and said, quiet enough so only he could hear, "You're lucky your father loves you." David never saw it. She was different around him, softer, sweeter. And Ethan didn't want to seem ungrateful or make trouble, so he tried to be good, really good. He did his homework without being asked. He brushed his teeth without reminders. He even started cleaning up after Claire's dog just to stay out of her way. But no matter how good he was, that coldness didn't go away. Then came the night of the bookshelf. Ethan had been curled up on the couch, flipping through an old comic book, when Claire walked in. David was upstairs on a call. Claire said nothing at first, just stared at the mess of books Ethan had left on the floor. "You think this house is your playground?" she asked, her voice low and sharp. "I was going to put them back," Ethan muttered, sitting up. She walked over slowly, not angry, calm, controlled. Then she knelt down, grabbed his arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to freeze him, and said, "You don't get to ruin things here. Do you understand me?" Ethan nodded, trying not to cry. She let go, stood up and walked away like nothing happened. David came down a minute later, smiling. "You two surviving down here?" Ethan looked up at him. He almost said something, almost, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he smiled back. "Yeah, we're fine." Ethan didn't tell anyone what happened that night. Not his teacher, not his grandma, not even his best friend Mason. What would he say anyway, that his dad's new fiancée grabbed his arm and whispered something scary? That she smiled in front of adults and sneered when no one was looking? No one would believe it, and deep down Ethan knew why. Claire was beautiful. She dressed nice. She laughed at David's jokes and made fancy dinners with cloth napkins. She even volunteered to help with the school fundraiser. People like Claire didn't look like villains, so Ethan stayed quiet. But the house didn't feel like home anymore. He tiptoed around her, memorized her moods, learned how to read her face the moment she walked in the room. If her lips were tight, he disappeared to his bedroom. If her heels clicked too fast across the floor, he'd pretend to be asleep. David noticed Ethan getting quieter. "You okay, buddy? You've been different lately." Ethan nodded. "Just tired." David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "All right. But you can always talk to me, you know that, right?" Ethan wanted to believe that. But the last time he tried to bring something up about Claire, just a passing comment about her yelling at the delivery guy, David got defensive, said she was under stress, that she didn't mean it, so Ethan backed off. One evening after dinner, Claire handed Ethan a dish towel. "Dry," she said, nodding toward the sink. He started drying plates, careful not to break anything. Claire scrubbed a pot in silence for a while before speaking. "You know," she said, not looking at him, "your dad and I are building something real. He needs peace in his life, not problems." Ethan didn't answer. She turned to him, towel in hand. "Are you going to be a problem, Ethan?" His hands froze, the plate nearly slipped. "No," he whispered. "Good," she smiled. That same smile from the first day. Polished, practiced. That night Ethan couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, thinking about the word problem. Was he one? Was he the reason his mum left? Was he the reason David looked so tired sometimes? Was Claire right? Would things be better if he just stopped getting in the way? His mind spiraled until morning. The next day at school, he missed half the math lesson. His teacher pulled him aside after class. "Everything okay at home?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded too fast. smiled too wide. Yeah, everything's fine. But it wasn't, and it was only going to get worse. It started with a name. Ethan had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water. It was late, way past his bedtime, but he couldn't sleep again. He crept down the stairs in his socks, careful not to make them squeak, and slowed when he heard voices. Claire was in the living room, alone, he thought at first. But she was on the phone. Her voice was low, firm, not sweet, not fake, just real in a way he'd never heard her be. "No, Mark," she said, "I told you, not yet." Ethan froze. "Mark?" She paced slowly across the floor. "He hasn't signed it. I can't push too hard or he'll get suspicious. Just be patient." Ethan leaned in, holding his breath. Claire stopped walking. "Once we're married, it'll be easier. Honeymoon's the window. After that, we're clear. No questions." The glass in Ethan's hand shook. He set it down on the counter as quietly as he could. Claire's voice dropped again. "You know how this works. It's not my first time." That sentence hit him like a slap. Not her first time? He backed away slowly, heart thudding in his ears. Upstairs, in his room, Ethan lay wide-eyed under the covers, trying to make sense of what he'd heard. Mark signing something. Honeymoon's the window. Was this about money? Something else? Was Claire planning something against his dad? The next morning, Ethan watched her closely at breakfast. Claire smiled and kissed David's cheek, poured him coffee, asked about his work trip next week. She looked normal, same hair, same sweater, same gentle tone, but to Ethan everything had changed. He tried to talk to David that afternoon. "Dad, has Claire ever talked about someone named Mark?" David blinked. "Mark? No, I don't think so. Why?" Ethan shrugged. "I don't know, just curious." David smiled, tousled Ethan's hair. "You're always curious." Ethan nodded, but inside he was screaming. That night, he sat on the floor of his room with a notebook, writing everything he remembered. The phone call, the words she used, the name, the tone of her voice. It felt crazy, like something out of a movie. But it wasn't. This was his house, his family, his dad. And now Ethan was sure. This wasn't just about her being mean. Something darker was happening. And he had no idea how to stop it. For the next few days, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about that phone call. Every time Claire walked into the room, his body tensed. Every time she picked up her phone, he tried to listen without looking obvious. But all he got were half sentences, quiet laughter, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He needed proof, something real, something his dad couldn't ignore. One afternoon, when Claire left to run errands and David was still at work, Ethan found himself standing in front of her laptop. It was sitting open on the dining table. He didn't know what he was looking for, he just knew he had to try. He sat down, fingers trembling, and clicked around carefully. No password. She must have thought no one would dare touch it. Inside one of the folders, buried under vacation photos and recipes, was a document labelled Travel Insurance, David. His heart thudded. He opened it. It wasn't just travel insurance, it was a life insurance policy, a big one. The kind you only get if you're planning for the worst. The beneficiary was listed as Claire. Ethan stared at the screen, his breathing shallow. What kind of person secretly takes out a policy on someone they're about to marry? Next, he clicked on another folder named Events. Dozens of photos popped up. At first, they seemed harmless. Pictures of Claire in nice clothes, at parties, smiling beside strangers. But one face kept showing up. The same man, tall, dark hair, sharp features. In every photo, he stood just close enough to Claire to suggest they weren't strangers. Ethan clicked on one picture. It was dated just 3 months ago from a hotel in another city. Claire and the man were holding hands. He clicked on another. They were kissing. His stomach turned. This had to be Mark. He closed the laptop, pushed back the chair, and stood still in the middle of the quiet house. Claire wasn't just mean. She wasn't just pretending. She was dangerous. And his dad, the one person who made him feel safe in the world, had no idea what he was walking into. Ethan didn't know what to do. He was just a kid. But he knew one thing for sure. If he didn't act soon, something terrible could happen. The night before the wedding rehearsal, Ethan barely slept. He lay curled under his blanket, staring at the ceiling, the images from Claire's laptop replaying over and over in his mind. The photos, the document, the name Mark. Every time he closed his eyes, he pictured his dad, standing at the altar, smiling, completely unaware he was walking into a trap. Ethan's chest felt heavy, like he was holding a secret too big for someone his age. He was just a kid. What could he possibly say to stop something like this? The next morning, as guests started to arrive in town, the house buzzed with excitement. Claire floated from room to room in a silk robe, talking about seating charts and candle colours. She looked radiant, effortless. David, meanwhile, looked happy, really happy, and that made it harder. Ethan watched them from the stairs, knees pulled to his chest. He wanted to scream, to shake his dad and say, "She's lying, she's dangerous, please believe me." But no one listens to a kid when there's cake to be cut and vows to write. Later that afternoon, during the rehearsal at the church, Ethan sat quietly in one of the pews while everyone practiced their steps. His tie felt too tight, his stomach hurt. When it was over, people clapped. Someone joked about Claire being too stunning for this town. David knelt beside Ethan and smiled. "You nervous about tomorrow?" Ethan opened his mouth, nothing came out. David gave him a soft nudge. "You'll do great, bud." But Ethan wasn't worried about his tux. He was worried his dad wouldn't make it past the honeymoon. That evening, back home, David found Ethan sitting on the porch staring at the sky. The sunset was soft, golden light spilling over the backyard fence. David sat beside him. "You've been quiet lately, quieter than usual." Ethan didn't look at him. "I need to tell you something." David waited, no smile, no rush, just stillness. Ethan took a breath. "I think Claire is hiding something from you." David blinked. "What do you mean?" "There's a man," Ethan whispered. "His name's Mark. I heard her talk to him on the phone and I saw pictures on her laptop. There's also this insurance paper and she said something about the honeymoon being the window." David's face tightened, not in anger, in confusion, in disbelief. "You looked through her laptop?" "I know I'm not supposed to," Ethan said quickly, "but I had to. I'm scared, Dad." David looked down at his hands, silent for a long moment. Finally he said, "Ethan, that's a really big accusation." "I know," Ethan said softly, "but I'm telling the truth." David looked over at him. And for the first time, he didn't look dismissive. He looked unsettled. And that was enough. Maybe, just maybe, the door had opened. That night, after Ethan went to bed, David sat alone at the kitchen table with a glass of water in his hand and too many thoughts in his head. He wanted to believe there was some explanation, that Claire was just misunderstood or that Ethan was confused or scared of change. But something about the way Ethan spoke, the fear in his voice, it didn't feel like a child exaggerating, it felt real. The next morning, David waited until Claire left for her dress fitting. Then he opened her laptop. He wasn't proud of it, but he was a father first. It didn't take long to find the folder. He opened the file labelled Travel Insurance, David. His own name stared back at him, beside numbers that made his stomach twist. Then came the photos. Claire with a man he didn't recognise, at dinner, in hotel rooms, holding hands. The timestamps were recent, weeks before they got engaged. David leaned back in his chair, the blood drained from his face. He closed the laptop, pressed his palms to his eyes and sat there for a long time, just breathing. That evening, he didn't say much. Claire returned home glowing with excitement, going on about flowers and shoes and vows. David nodded, smiled when appropriate, but something in his eyes had shifted. Ethan noticed. He followed David into the garage later, where his dad was pretending to sort tools. "Did you check?" Ethan asked quietly. David nodded. "I did." "And?" Another long pause. Then David crouched down to look him in the eye. "You did the right thing telling me." Ethan felt the tightness in his chest loosen, just a little. The next day, David cancelled the wedding, not loudly, not dramatically. He simply told Claire that something didn't feel right anymore, that they were rushing things, that he needed space. Claire didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just stood there, stunned, her mouth a flat line. Then, calmly, she picked up her purse and walked out the door. But something about how easily she let go made David uneasy. That evening, he called a friend, someone he'd known since college who now worked in financial investigations. He asked him to look into Claire, quietly. The next morning, the friend called back. "I don't know how to say this," he said, "but Claire's name has come up before. Different cities, different men, always the same story. Whirlwind romance, big insurance policies, sudden disappearances." David felt sick. He looked out the window, watching Ethan in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball against the fence. He could have lost everything, and the only reason he didn't was because his son spoke up. For a few days, things were quiet, too quiet. Claire stopped calling. She didn't show up at the house. No dramatic texts, no tears, no apology. And that somehow felt worse. David kept thinking, if she were innocent, wouldn't she fight for them? Wouldn't she be upset, confused, begging for an explanation? But instead, She vanished like someone who knew the game was over. He didn't tell Ethan everything, just that they weren't getting married anymore. Ethan didn't ask why, he just nodded and sat a little closer to his dad on the couch that night. David couldn't stop thinking about the photos, the documents. The fact that someone could live in his home, sleep beside him, smile at his child, while planning something so dark. But more than anything, he couldn't stop thinking about how close he'd come to not listening. If Ethan hadn't spoken up, if he'd brushed it off like a phase, a mood, just nerves, what would have happened? One afternoon, they went to the park. The same one David used to take Ethan to after school when he was little. They sat on the same bench near the duck pond, sipping slushies and watching the water ripple in the breeze. "I was scared you wouldn't believe me," Ethan said quietly, not looking up. David's throat tightened, he set down his drink. "I almost didn't," he admitted, "and I hate that." Ethan nodded slowly. She was really good at pretending. David looked over at his son. This little boy who had seen more than he should have, felt things he didn't yet have words for. "I'm proud of you," David said, his voice thick. "You were brave. You saw something wrong and you didn't stay silent." Ethan shrugged, but his eyes watered. "I didn't want to lose you." David reached over and pulled him into a hug, a long, quiet one. "You won't," he whispered, "not ever." That night David lay awake for hours. He knew it wasn't over. Claire hadn't just disappeared, she was out there somewhere. And people like her didn't just walk away. So when the call came 2 days later, a blocked number, a shaky voice, he wasn't surprised. "You made a mistake," the voice said. "We weren't done." Then it hung up. David stared at the phone in his hand. He didn't know if it was Claire or someone else. But one thing was clear. This wasn't finished, not yet. David didn't sleep much after the call. He kept replaying the voice in his head, the way it sounded distant, almost casual, like someone commenting on the weather. "You made a mistake, we weren't done?" It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a threat, but it didn't have to be. It was a message, a warning. The next morning, David dropped Ethan off at school like normal. But as he pulled away from the curb, he checked the rearview mirror twice, then again, just to be sure. Back home, he called his friend, the one who had helped him dig into Claire's background. "I think someone's watching us," David said quietly. There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end said, "Meet me in person. We need to talk." That afternoon, they met at a coffee shop just outside town. No suits, no files, just two old friends with tired eyes and too many questions. "I looked deeper," his friend said. "Claire's real name isn't Claire. It's been changed more than once. She has a record, sealed in some states, but it's there. Fraud, conspiracy. Even one case that never made it to trial because the other person disappeared." David blinked. "Disappeared?" His friend nodded. "She was never convicted, but the pattern's there. Wealthy men, fast relationships, insurance policies, and then accidents." David sat back, heart pounding. "And Mark? We still don't have her full name, but he's been linked to her before. Photos, hotel records. They always use fake names, move around. You were lucky, David, really lucky." David shook his head. "I wasn't lucky. Ethan saved me." His friend leaned forward. "You need to tell the police. Let them open a file, even if it's just to document what you've got." David hesitated. What if it puts Ethan in more danger? Doing nothing might be worse. That night after dinner, David tucked Ethan in. The boy looked up at him, his face softer now, lighter somehow. "Do you think she's gone for good?" Ethan asked. David forced a smile. "I hope so." But hope wasn't enough. After Ethan fell asleep, David sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at the call log. Blocked number, no trace. He reached for his laptop and started writing everything down. Every detail he remembered, every folder he found, every phone call, every photo. If anything ever happened, someone had to know the full story. Outside, the wind picked up. The branches tapped against the window. Inside, the house was quiet. But David couldn't shake the feeling they weren't alone. 2 days passed. No more calls, no strange cars parked outside, no signs of Claire. David wanted to believe it was over, but part of him knew better. He started double-checking the locks at night, watching the street from the living room window, setting his alarm earlier to walk Ethan to school himself. Ethan didn't say much about it, but he felt it too. The shift in the air, the way his dad lingered longer at the front door, how he jumped a little when the phone rang. One morning, just as they were leaving for school, a manila envelope showed up on their doorstep. No stamp, no return address. David spotted it first. He picked it up slowly, opened it on the porch. Inside were photographs, grainy, taken from a distance, him and Ethan walking down the sidewalk, another one of Ethan at the playground, one more of David at the gas station looking over his shoulder. No note. Just the pictures. David's hands trembled. He didn't say anything to Ethan, just tucked the envelope under his arm and drove to school like usual. After dropping him off, David went straight to the police. He handed over everything. The folder of insurance documents, the photos from Claire's laptop, and now this envelope. The detective on duty listened carefully, took notes, asked questions. When David finished, the detective leaned back and said, "You were right to come in, and we're taking this seriously. People like her, they don't usually work alone, and when money's involved, it gets dangerous fast." David nodded slowly. "Do you want us to keep watch near your home?" the detective offered. David hesitated. "Yes, but don't make it obvious. If she thinks we're scared, she might run." Later that night, as Ethan brushed his teeth, David sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. He didn't want to live like this, not in fear, not in silence. But most of all, he didn't want Ethan to grow up thinking the world was full of people waiting to hurt you. So when Ethan came back into the room and climbed under the covers, David looked at him and said, "You know what's funny?" Ethan blinked. "What?" "I used to think I was the one protecting you, but you've been protecting me this whole time." Ethan's lips curled into the smallest smile. "We protect each other." David nodded. "Yeah, we do." Outside, the street was quiet. But now they weren't just watching. They were ready. Weeks passed. The leaves started to turn and the mornings came colder. No more letters, no more photos, no more phone calls. Police kept quiet watch over the neighbourhood, unmarked cars blending in with the morning traffic. David never told Ethan they were there. He didn't want him living in fear, but he also didn't want to let his guard down. Not yet. Then one evening, just before dinner, David got a call from the detective. "We found him," the voice said. "The man in the pictures. His name is Marcus Dale. Fake ID, fake business. But we tracked him through a rental car tied to Claire's old address." David stood still, the phone pressed tightly to his ear. "And Claire?" he asked. "She wasn't with him," the detective said. "But he's talking. A lot. Sounds like she's been doing this for years, different names, different cities. And this time it almost worked." David exhaled. "Almost." "Yeah," the detective said. "Thanks to your kid." That night, David didn't say anything to Ethan. Not yet. Instead, they grilled burgers in the backyard, just the two of them. No wedding plans, no secrets hanging in the air. Ethan helped flip their patties, laughing when one slipped off the spatula. "Backyard chef," David joked. "Very professional." Ethan grinned, more relaxed than he'd been in months. They ate outside under the string lights David had hung last summer. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like peace. Later, as they sat in the grass looking up at the stars, David finally spoke. "She won't be coming back," he said gently. Ethan turned to him. "Are you sure?" David nodded. "The police found the man she was working with, and now they're watching everything. We're safe." Ethan didn't say anything right away. He just scooted closer, resting his head on David's shoulder. "I'm glad you're okay," he whispered. David smiled, eyes damp. "Me too, kiddo, me too." In the weeks that followed, life settled into something new, something better. They started reading detective novels together, the old-fashioned kind with missing clues and clever kids who solved big mysteries. Every Saturday, they'd take long walks around the neighbourhood just talking about school, comics, movies, dreams. There was no wedding in their future, no new stepmom. But there was something better. Safety, trust, and a bond that nothing could fake. And one day, Ethan brought home a school essay. The title was simple, "The Day I Saved My Dad." David read it in the kitchen, one hand on his heart. It didn't go into details, no insurance papers, no phone calls, no danger. Just a quiet story about a boy who noticed something felt wrong and spoke up anyway. A story about love and listening, and how sometimes being believed is the most powerful thing of all. This story touches something deeply real. The quiet unease children often feel, but adults are too quick to dismiss. What makes it special isn't some dramatic twist or flashy reveal. It's the small silence of Ethan, the quiet courage inside his fear, and the journey of a father slowly waking up, from being blinded by love to realising his child saw the truth all along. There are no fights, no chase scenes, just dinner tables, lingering glances, late-night phone calls, and in the end, trust, the kind that saves a family. This is the kind of story that stays with you, quietly, gently, the kind that makes you put a hand over your heart and ask yourself, if a child says something feels wrong, would I listen? And if you've made it all the way to this moment, thank you. Thank you for sitting with this story, for feeling every pause, every silence, every heartbeat between a father and his son. If it moved you, even just a little, please consider giving this video a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who still believes in quiet courage. You are always welcome here. This is Rain Inside, and we'll see you next time. Stay safe, stay soft, and keep listening.